It's now my immense pleasure to introduce Mary Bauermeister. It's another dream come true that Mary is with us here today. Mary has been working as an artist for over 60 years. Her studio in Cologne from 1960 to 1962 is one of the great laboratories of 1960s art. It's considered to be one of the birthplaces of the Fluxus movement. Mary held her first solo exhibition in the Stedelijk Museum in Amsterdam in 1962 and afterwards moved to New York. Since 1972 she has been living and working in Germany again. Her work is in many, many museums, MoMA, Guggenheim, Whitney, Hirshhorn, the Museum Ludwig, in many, many collections. It was one of the great, I must say, transformative experiences for me preparing this marathon to visit Mary's studio in Cologne, where we saw so many transformations, but where we also could see the bridges she creates between music, literature, and art. And it was a couple of years ago when actually Peter Cook said that maybe Cedric Price is the ultimate marathon architect. We could maybe say that Mary is the ultimate marathon artist, because this idea of the marathon to pool knowledge is so present in her work, to go beyond the single field of knowledge in order to bring in a vast constellation of intensities. In a piece called 1 + 1 = 3, so we're here connecting it actually to Marcus with the equations and mathematics, and it's amazing because on the way here, Mary was reading one of Marcus de Soto's book, but in her piece titled 1 + 1 = 3, Mary will be storytelling and playing a Viking flute, a flute she has made herself from bamboo. Please give a very, very warm welcome to Mary Bauermeister.
I'm not a musician. That's why I can be more free than any musician can be. I can scream, laugh. I can do anything with it. When I would try to do this in my own profession, I would be limited by my knowledge. So what I advise to you, what he advised to people, go out of the Greek system into the Chinese, or into the, go out of your own profession. When you are perfect in something, go beyond it. Do something else, because you can be much more free, because you're not limited by what you know and by your own professionship. I love this instrument. It can be played by anybody. It is not like an Australian instrument where you have to learn breathing. This can be played by any child, by anybody, without torturing yourself through rehearsing. So you can really be free in expressing. And I brought it. I didn't know if I would use it, but when I heard so many words today, so much talking, I thought we should also have some more music, and that's why I loved the contribution before from the mathematician. Now, mathematics and music is very close anyway, so I will do some more singing while I do my whatever I will do. In the beginning, it was frequency, not the word. I think that it's a wrong translation to say the word logos is not a word, it's frequency, because frequency is everything. You can everything can be expressed in frequencies. If it's sound, if it's smell, if it's color. And as a child, I have a very early memory. So at that time, I could smell music. I could notes had colors had numbers. It was even before language that all my senses were completely. They could be transformed one in the other. And now in my old age, I'm reaching the winter of my old age, I start to be dement a little bit. So you start to develop backwards. It's knowledge is not so important anymore. Feeling is more important. When I look in the mirror, I see, yeah, I'm old now. When I feel inside, I don't feel it. So that confirms Juliet's information. We need outer measurements to stop the transfer. Oh, Professor Juliet, a great example to your gardening in Asia is they always show the season, but they always show the opposite. There's always in a Japanese garden a dying away thing. While the things are blossoming, something else is decaying. They always show both cycles. So there is no beginning and end, because you have always, there's some rotten stone or some old branch or some brown bush which reminds you that everything is decaying and is going to its end. I always had the feeling that I would die before I was 78. I was convinced from childhood on, as if destiny would throw an arrow and you could never change it, and it would. So in the day before I was my 78th birthday, I changed my home. I had reduced my property to nearly nothing. I had made the testament, paid the bills, and I sat in my bed waiting now to die, because I was so convinced. But I didn't. 4 o'clock in the morning, nothing happened. I was so disappointed. Then I said, oh, maybe it's summertime. Maybe wait another hour. Nothing happened at 5 o'clock. Then my world broke apart, because until then I had always lived by intuition. I can think, yes, but usually all my doing comes from intuition and inspiration. And I said, when I'm wrong in this one, then I could have been wrong with everything else I believed in, everything else I was convinced of. And since then, I'm writing on my second book, my illumination neurosis, or esoteric errors, because I had believed so many things so convincingly without trying to defend my opinion. I have survived several sicknesses, cancer, strokes, embolies, alternatively, because I'm not yet 78, I cannot die of it. So I was so convinced about that I couldn't die, I survived my deadly sicknesses. I do some more little singing now. Everything is frequency. When you can translate even a landscape into music. I had an experience years ago when I was part of a Hagiakora, a kind of geomancy school in the forest. We had lived in the mountains, snow, 1st of May, intense, but we were out in the forest. And it was a foggy, beautiful, cold day with high plants in the valley. And we were in a kind of hallucination by freezing, fasting, walking. And then I suddenly heard the whole valley singing. And it was singing in a canon. I cannot sing a canon here, but I can sing you the melody of that valley. It was there. And I went there a year later, it was still there. Can you imagine this in the canon 3 times? When I was in Africa, you can train this. When you fast, don't talk and don't eat, only drink water. You do this for 3 weeks, you have better things than LSD and anything, because you're really into a visionary state. Then you can hear the landscapes. Africa sounds different. There is a certain spot on a mountain in Africa, it sounds. It was completely rhythmic. So completely different way. The valley in Germany was like a melody, and Africa was like rhythm. Oh, this reminds me of a great experience I had. I lived with a genius of a musician for a while. 11 years was too much already, but that was possible. Yeah, a genius can warm landscapes and audiences, but when you live too close, you get burned. So anyway, with this kind of music genius, I went to the gold mines in South Africa. And every Sunday, the black people have the permission not to work, but they can make music. So here we came with a German consul and 3 musicians, white musicians, to the black guys, and they were playing xylophone. And they played a piece. One was dancing around the instrument and playing the tones. And the others were listening. And then a second jumped in. He also danced, and he played notes in between. That was already difficult enough. Then a third one came, and he played only those keys which hadn't been touched before. A mastership of hearing and of rhythm. And they drummed and danced and played. It was unbelievable. Stockhausen said, these people we call primitive, they are much, much more evolved rhythmically than we are. So every country, every people, every nation, everybody has different ways of expression, different ways of knowledge. So then our white musicians, they tried to imitate it, and they failed completely. And the black guys giggled and laughed and had their fun that our musical masters had so much trouble to imitate them. It took them 10 minutes to really a little bit, at least theoretically, did what they did. No? So, yeah, that's one. Actually, I should start my lecture. I gave up giving a lecture. When I heard so many good lectures today, then I made just little notes. I thought I make a patchwork because that's more fun. So I just choose any card. I wrote something on it. Yeah, like I had a stroke a few years ago, and I lost my capacity to speech. Funny enough, I could still announce the rhythm, and even the vocals were right, but the meaning was absolutely turned upside down, completely crazy. And I learned talking again by what I wanted to say by singing it. So I didn't talk, I sang it, and the words came back. So that is also interesting. When you have some trouble, try to sing instead of talking. I remember having been a two-dimensional being. It must have been long before I ever entered physical life, because the memory was that I was part of a plane. I was part of a we, but I could already figure a feeling of me, of me as a subject. And that plane turned slowly. But I cannot talk without my hands. So the plane cycled slowly, and in the middle it turned into a kind of whirl, a kind of strudel whirl. And I was incredibly curious, and I approached with a plane, and I could have stayed. I had still the choice not to be drawn into it, but I was so curious that I wanted to jump into the world, but I programmed myself, I don't want to forget where I came from. I saw color, I saw space, and I programmed myself, I want to remember I came from the plane. And then the last thought I had was, oh, maybe the plane was already another kind of world. Maybe the plane came also from somewhere else, because it was a mere thinking thing. And that, in my childhood, I remembered this decision. Every time I became very small, you can call me schizophrenic because all my senses wrong, but I survived schizophrenia by handling it. And my parents were nice enough not to say I'm crazy. My mother said, not everybody sees the same. She always consoled me when I perceived the world differently. I had moments when I became smaller and smaller until I was the tiniest you could imagine, and that turned suddenly, and I was the biggest, and the whole universe was within me. This was long before school. It was, I guess, even long before talking. And when I hear my grandchild, a 5-year-old boy, beautiful child, he says time, which nobody can see, but which is in the smallest Ritze, was heißt Ritze? Smallest corner. Yeah. Or he said, he came home from kindergarten, Mommy, what is in the universe? What is in the cosmos? My daughter said, nothing. Mama, there is lumps, time, and God, but time was before God. Can you imagine that a 5-year-old boy can think something like that? That means school is actually harmful because it trains us into a thinking which is limited. So it's limitation. And any education can be great. We can learn something, but we should never forget that education is limitation. It limits us from a broader way of perceiving into maybe being functional people who function well in society. And all what you'd experience with your mountain terminal. I read your book, absolutely wonderful. She was one with the mountain. So this is also a perception which children have. For children, everything is alive. The mountain is alive, the stone is alive. And people told me stones are dead. That's not true, because everything I saw as a child had shimmering waves around it. So there is nothing dead. Everything which exists has a soul. Even this has a soul. Maybe it's an emergency soul, but it wouldn't function. It wouldn't stand here. It wouldn't hold together if not a kind of emergency soul would connect it to the thought of the inventor. So I go on with my cards. Yeah, everything I did in art was not accepted as art. Now I'm called an artist, funny enough, because everything which I did now is called art. But while I did it, my cloth with work, it's a female needlework, my stones, everybody does it on the beach. Anything I did was before it was used as art material, and then a man, Buddha, started to work with cloth, and then it was called the new sensitivity. So then I was rehabilitated. And I always say this to female artists: if you do something new in art, it will not be accepted unless more people join it. And that's the one advantage of having a manifest or a group of people who do something together. The trouble with manifests is that they limit you again, because you manifest something, you say have a theory to what you do, and then you stick to the theory, no more to your intuition. And the artist's capacity and what we could contribute to society is what we feel and what we sense and what intuitive comes in our open receiver. Because the spirit of the future doesn't work from knowledge or from past, it works from the future. The impulse comes from the future. And for that you need an open intuition. Not only an open intellect, but most important is because the intuition can bring things which you don't understand yet. That's the one thing why I sometimes defend belief systems, although they brought about only horror on earth. But people who believe, they can believe things which are impossible, which are not logic. So this is in broadening logic. And on the other hand, St. Mary's Immaculate Conception was a miracle, but in the future might be the only way we will reproduce. So it's a kind of, who knows? We still celebrate her, maybe out of a subconscious knowledge that this will be the future of mankind, when we have decayed so much and perverted so much that we don't reproduce anymore in an animal way of life. Anyway, I have sometimes the feeling of preaching. That's when I stop myself, because I don't want to make a new manifest. But if you are not convinced of something, you cannot be enthusiastic. So in the moment you do something, you must be enthusiastic behind it. But already when you repeat yourself, it's a danger. And artists are tempted to repeat themselves because they get, the artist said, oh, this collector needs a box, and this collector, and the museum was one. So you produce what society wants, and that is dangerous, because you can become the victim of the good or the bad taste of your epoch, and you never know, is it good or bad taste? So that's when I was, and any success, I broke it. When I had my Amsterdam exhibition with Sandberg in the Stedelijk Museum, I was so high in success that I have to cut it. I went to America. When I was on my peak in America, I cut it and I went back to the German forest. And another advice, break your success. When you are successful in something, don't go on doing it. Stop it, do something else, then you enlarge also your brain. Yeah, 1 and 1 is 3. That was one of the books which was very important for our anarchic use of the 50s and the 60s. We all were read songs. We had to be anarchists because the society started to be fundamentalist again, and it was after war, the disappointment of our parents, nobody was guilty, everybody had. No. Yeah, nobody was guilty. I'm a German girl, post-war, 10 years old when the war was over, and all ideals broke and crumbled because our soldiers had gone out to fight the enemy. The enemy had destroyed our cities. Grandfather, father, brother, everybody was wounded. Houses were bombed, so there was the enemy. And there came the enemy, a black guy on a tank throwing candies at us. I was in the Kinderlandverschleppung in Kufstein, and this is the enemy. And it was a laughing guy, and he threw, and they said, oh, this is poison. It comes from the enemy. The candies must be poisoned. We kids didn't believe already. We collected the candies, and we had a lot of candies, and then our group of children said, one of us must test. Okay, in a minute, Mr. You. So it came to me. We had to test the candies, the poisoned candies from the pen. So I tasted. They looked at nothing happened. I wasn't poisoned. They were great. We didn't have a candy for a long time. So ever since, our generation didn't believe our grown-ups anymore. So the respect of parents and their beliefs absolutely broke. So you can understand our new moves in art. If it's zero, if it's whatever art movement came after the war, it was a total break with the beliefs of our parents, because parents who can play Beethoven and kill Jews and gypsies, what is this? So it's not Beethoven's fault, and it's not Wagner's fault, but Wagner was critical. So it is very difficult then to accept any concept of the grown-ups, what is right or wrong. I did a lot of things in my life which were definitely wrong, but I did it against the will of the grown-ups. And this explains a lot of the art movements after the war, because you must remember that Germany was entartet Kunst. Whatever Hitler had forbidden, of course, for us was good, in the principle of you like your enemy's enemy. So anything which Hitler had forbidden grew up and was then, of course, the only art. That was then other art wasn't accepted because it was pro-Hitler. So the art became political. And it is a big difference of artists after the war who had still gone out as teenage soldiers, they had shot people, or if they only had helped in the lazaret. So there is sometimes a generation of 3 or more years. Beuys is a completely different generation than 5 years later. He had been in war, he had shot, and he was part of the war. And even in these generations, there were big conflicts because for example, light. The whole experience as a child, when you see light bombs dropping on cities, phosphor bombs, and they look beautiful, but you know they bring murder, they bring killing. And the light artist, Pine, his light show, was part of his experience when he was helping the Flak to look at the sky where the planes were. I have another problem. At time of a bombing, it was too late to crawl, to get into a shelter, but there was a kind of beton, cement tube lying there, and time out, okay, goodbye. Here.